Ninth degree or Master-elect of 9. This is an important and interesting grade. In it is detailed the mode in which certain craftsmen who have just before the completion of the temple, been engaged in an execrable deed of villainy, received their punishment. This assembly is called a chapter. Decorations. The chapter represents an apartment in Solomon's palace. The hangings are red with white intermixed with flames. In the north are 9 lights, 8 close together, and 1 by itself. Titles. The master represents Solomon, and is styled most sovereign. There is only one warden, seated in the west, who represents Stokin, and is called inspector, with 7 brethren round him. All the rest of the brethren are in the south. Clothing. The most sovereign in royal robes, the inspector and brethren all in black robes and caps, or napped hats. Apron, white, spotted with blood lines and bordered with black. On the flap a bloody arm holding a dagger. On the apron a bloody arm holding a bloody head by the hair. Order, a broad black ribbon crossing from the left shoulder to the right hip, towards the lower extremity of which are 9 red roses, 4 on each side, and from the 9th is suspended the jewel. Jewel, which is a poniard, with a golden hilt, and a silver blade, or more properly a balance with a scroll and dagger on one plate and the decapitated head of ignorance on the other. Draft. The draft of this chapter is an oblong square at the upper part of which, to the right, is drawn the city of Jerusalem. On the other side is represented a cave not far from the sea, and near Joppa, surrounded with rocks, in which you discover a man lying with his head on a rock, and a poniard at his feet. You also see in the cave a burning lamp suspended from the ceiling, also running water and the cup to drink from. On the top of the mountain above the cave is a figure of a setting sun. In the middle of the draft appears a bush as if on fire, and burning by the reflection of a rainbow which seems to stand fixed in order to point out the asylum the murderer had taken refuge in to elude the vigilance of his pursuers. You also see in the draft a winding road, which leads from Jerusalem to Joppa. On this road, near the cave, you see a dog. Close to the dog a man following him. Behind them at some distance are 8 other men without order. Ante-room decorations. In the ante-room must be an artificial cave, and a large stone for the candidate to sit on, a small table before the mouth of the cave. On it a poniard and a lighted lamp, below the lamp in large letters the word revenge. There must also be a spring of water and the cup to drink from, also on the floor and at the mouth of the cave an effigy of the man as if asleep. His head must be loosed from his body. In the chapter the most sovereign sits under a canopy in a chair of state covered with black. Before him a triangular table covered with black and fiery-colored cloth. On said table is a Bible, scepter and poniard. Solomon uses a scepter, and the inspector uses a mallet which he holds constantly in his hands as a token of revenge. Opening ceremonies. Most sovereign, brother inspector, what is the hour? Inspector, most sovereign, the dog star rises in the east, followed by the archer, and they are in pursuit of the serpent of ignorance. Most sovereign, brother Stokin, are you an elected knight? Stokin, a lamp lighted me, a cave received me, and a spring refreshed me. Most sovereign, knocks 8 quick, and 1 slow. Stokin, knocks 8 quick and 1 slow. With his poniard, all the brethren knock 8 quick, and 1 slow. With their hands. Most sovereign, this chapter is opened. At the reception the brethren sit with the right leg over the left, the right elbow on the right knee, the head resting in the palm of the right hand. Candidate, knocks 8 and 1. Stokin, most sovereign, there is an alarm at the door. Most sovereign, brother Adoniram, see who knocks at the door of our chapter to interrupt our deliberations. Captain of guard, goes to the door, knocks 8 and 1. Then opens door. Who knocks at the door of our chapter to interrupt our deliberations? Master of ceremonies, a stranger who demands to speak to the king privately. Captain of guard, most sovereign, it is a stranger who wishes to speak to you privately. Most sovereign, let him be admitted. Captain of guard opens the door and admits the stranger, who goes at once to the king and consults with him privately for a few moments, and then takes a seat. Most sovereign, brethren, I have this moment learned from this stranger that he has discovered an individual concealed in a cave near the coast of Joppa, answering the description of one of the murderers of our lamented master Hiram Abith. He has also offered to conduct those I may select to the place of his concealment. All rise and request to be partakers in the vengeance due the villain. Most sovereign, stop, my brethren, I hereby decree that only 9 shall undertake the journey, and to avoid giving offense, I hereby order all your names to be placed in an urn, and the first 9 that are drawn shall be the brethren to accompany the stranger. Their names are put in the urn, they proceed to ballot till the 8th one is elected. Master of Ceremonies, Knox 8 and 1. When the brethren resume their former positions. Stokin, most sovereign, there is an alarm at the door. Most sovereign, Brother Adoniram, see who knocks at the door of our chapter to interrupt our deliberations. Captain of Guard, goes to the door, Knox 8 and 1. Opens it and says, who knocks at the door of our chapter to interrupt our deliberations? Master of Ceremonies, it is Brother Joabot, who comes to ask the favor of receiving the degree of Master-elect of 9. Captain of Guard, most sovereign, it is Joabot who comes to ask the favor of receiving the degree of Master-elect of 9. Most sovereign, let him be admitted. Captain of Guard opens the door. The Master of Ceremonies and candidate enter and advance to the altar. Most sovereign, faithful Joabot, what is your wish? Master of Ceremonies, for candidate, I come to ask the favor of being admitted into the degree of Master-elect of 9. Most sovereign, what motive induces you to think you deserve such an honor to be conferred upon you? Master of Ceremonies, my zeal, fervor and constancy, which I promise shall be doubled hereafter, have made me aspire to beg this favor. Most sovereign, learn, Brother Joabot, that you are to impute your present admission into this degree in chapter, less to a desire we may have of conferring this degree on you, than to an inclination we have of making a trial of your conduct and courage, and your compliance with the obligations you have contracted in the different degrees you have received. You may recollect that when you were made a Mason after the light was shown you, you saw all the brethren were armed, and you know that it was in your power to claim their assistance in case you were exposed to any danger. You were also aware that those arms were intended for your destruction, to be plunged into your breast, to vindicate Masonry, should you be so wicked as to violate your solemn obligations and divulge the secrets of Masonry or of Masons. Still, notwithstanding these most sacred and solemn obligations and the severe penalties we submitted ourselves to incur in swerving from them, there have been people so vile as to violate those sacred ties and expose themselves to all the tortures which they had denounced against themselves. Know, my brother, that at this present hour we have in our power one of the perpetrators and murderers of our respectable Master Hiram Abiff, who groans under the enormity of his guilt, and expects every moment to undergo the rigorous tortures which his crime richly merits, to serve as an example to deter others. This, Brother Joabot, I have just learned from a stranger who is willing to conduct any I may appoint to the place where this miscreant or Adoniram is hidden. My dear brother, this illustrious chapter, being fully convinced of your zeal, is much disposed to confer higher degrees upon you, and as I have decreed that only 9 shall go with the stranger to the hiding place of the miscreant, and as 8 of them have been selected, an opportunity now offers of your being one of that number, to bring this criminal to condign punishment if possible, adequate to the enormity of his crime. Do you find yourself disposed to vindicate the royal art, and sacrifice this traitor in honor of Masonry? And do you feel disposed to be one of that number? Candidate, I do. Most sovereign, I must now inform yon, Brother Joabot, that this man perhaps is one of your acquaintances, perhaps a friend. Nay, he may be one of your most intimate ones, but in such case as this, every sentiment must give way to that of revenge, which, with you, is to stifle every oilier consideration. Be assured of no bad consequences attending your perpetrating the revenge. Besides, this is the only opportunity that offers of making us sensible of your zeal by which you will be admitted into this degree. Again I will ask you, do you feel disposed to be one of that number? Candidate, I do. Most sovereign, faithful Joabot, I shall now select you as the 9th and last of the number. Pursue the murderer of our regretted Master Hiram Abiff, seek him, seize him and bring him here to suffer the penalty of his horrid crime. Most sovereign, vengeance. All, vengeance. Most sovereign Brother Adoniram, you will now blindfold Brother Joabot and let him be conducted by our stranger to the place where the criminal is. Candidate is then blindfolded and conducted to the cave. Captain of Guard, Brother Joabot, you will now suffer yourself to be seated, seats him on a stone opposite the cave. Captain of Guard, be not afraid, Brother Joabot, I will now leave you for a while. Master of Ceremonies then shakes a parcel of chains and groans as if under affliction and dread of punishment. Captain of Guard then places Joe Abbott's left hand on the table and his head leaning on it, and his right hand on his thigh, and says, Captain of Guard, my dear brother Joe Abbott, I must leave you here alone, but you must promise me on the word of a man, that you will remain in this posture that I now leave you, however alarmed you may be by any noise you may hear. Attend brother Joe Abbott to what I say, for if you neglect it, it may cost you your life. What do you say? Candidate, I will. Captain of Guard, and now brother Joe Abbott, as soon as I leave you, when you hear anyone knock as a Mason, take off the bandage from your eyes and closely examine every object around you. When you hear a second knocking in a Masonic manner, drink of the cup near your left hand. And at the third knocking, do as you shall be prescribed by a voice which will direct you. Though I leave you alone, brother Joe Abbott, believe me that the eyes of the whole lodge are upon you, therefore I beg that you will not fail, punctually to comply with these instructions. Farewell brother Joe Abbott, I now leave you. Captain of the Guard then leaves him and shuts the door briskly, waits for a minute or two and then knocks the first 3. Candidate, takes the bandage from his eyes. Captain of Guard, knocks the second 3. Candidate, drinks out of the cup. Captain of Guard, knocks the last 3 and returns to the chapter. Master of Ceremonies, take that poniard and strike the villain first on the head and then on the heart. Cut off his head and take it in your left hand, the poniard in your right, and follow me. Candidate, obeys the order. Master of Ceremonies, conducts him to the door of the chapter, knocks 8 and 1. Captain of Guard, most sovereign, there is an alarm at the door. Most sovereign, you will see who knocks at the door of our chapter to interrupt our deliberations. Captain of Guard, knocks 8 and 1, and opens the door. Who knocks at the door of our chapter to interrupt our deliberations? Master of Ceremonies, brother Joe Abbott, who has discovered the place where the traitor Kirop has been concealed, and has revenged the death of our respectable Master Hiram Abiff, and comes to lay the villain's head at the feet of King Solomon. Captain of Guard, shuts the door. Most sovereign, it is Joe Abbott who has discovered the place where the traitor Kirop has been concealed and has revenged the death of our respectable Master Hiram Abiff, and comes to lay the villain's head at the feet of his sovereign. Most sovereign, let him be admitted. Captain of Guard, opens the door and says, let him be admitted. Master of Ceremonies and candidate enter and proceed directly to the foot of the throne, candidate at the same time striking the head with his dagger, and crying revenge. Most sovereign, looking with indignation, says, O wretch, what have you been doing? My orders to you were, that the traitor should be brought to me, not that you should put him to death. Your disobedience of my orders shall cost you your life. Stokin, put him to death. Brethren all kneel on one knee, and at the same time brother Stokin lays hold of candidate's head and with his sword stands in the attitude of killing him. Captain of Guard, thrice most sovereign, pardon him. Pardon him. It must have been an excess of zeal and love for the memory of our respectable Master Hiram Abiff, certainly, that prompted him to disobey his orders. Pardon him. All, thrice most sovereign, pardon him. Most sovereign, brethren, I yield to your entreaties, and pardon him in consideration of his zeal for doing his duty. For it was necessary and right, for the authority of public justice must prevail and all who resist it must be subdued. Brother Joe Abbott, for the zeal you have manifested in bringing to punishment one of the murderers of our lamented Master Hiram Abiff, I shall now confer upon you the degree of Master-elect of 9. Come and contract your obligation. Obligation, Master-elect of 9. I state your name. Do solemnly promise in the presence of the great architect of the universe, and of the respectable brethren here present, and who compose this illustrious chapter of elected masters, never to reveal the secrets of this degree, with which I have been or shall be made acquainted, to any person whatever, but to a brother known to be of this degree, and in this I bind myself by all my former obligations. I likewise promise to revenge Masonry in general, and particularly the most horrid murder that ever was committed. I also promise to protect and support the order and my brethren with all my might, credit and power, and also the Grand Council of Princes of Jerusalem. And if I fail in any part of this my present obligation and engagement, I submit to perish by the vindictive weapon, which shall be given me as an honorable mark of this order, and as a reward of my zeal, fervor and constancy. So help me God, Amen. Most sovereign, rise my brother and receive your reward. I do hereby constitute you an elect of 9 and invest you with the jewel of this degree, which is a balance with a scroll and dagger on one plate, and the decapitated head of ignorance on the other. He then invests him with the apron and kisses him 4 times on each cheek and once on the forehead. Sign. First one raises the poniard and makes the motion of striking the other on the forehead. The other places his hand on his forehead as if to examine the supposed wound. Second raises the arm, strikes at the other's breast as if with the poniard, and says, Necum. Answer. Place your right hand on your heart and say Neca. Token. Clinch the fingers of your right hand, and at the same time elevate your thumb. The second seizes your thumb with the right hand, at the same time elevating his thumb, signifying the 9 elected, 8 close together and 1 by itself. Password, big ol' curl. Sacred word, Necum. Answer. Neca. Battery, 9 strokes by 8 and 1. Age, full 8 and 1. Hours of work, from break of day until evening. Moral, that we should be careful how we suffer ourselves to be led away by an excess of zeal, even in a good cause, to execute on an individual the vengeance due for the violation of divine or human laws. Most sovereign, Brother Stokin, you will now conduct our new brother to his seat, to listen attentively to the discourse by our Grand Orator. Discourse by Grand Orator. Thrice respectable brother elected, the unanimity and earnestness with which this respectable assembly requested your pardon, dispose our heart to grant it, especially as your crime was owing to an overzeal. In this you have imitated Joabot, King Solomon's favorite, as I am now going to inform you. You, my brother, without doubt recollect the melancholy catastrophe of our respectable master Hiram Abiff, whose death is the constant subject of our grief and tears. And in this we take an example from the wisest of kings, who bemoaned the irreparable loss he has sustained by his death. You will know that Solomon, on hearing that he was missing, immediately put a stop to building and swore that no person should be paid his wages until this great man was found dead or alive. You will also recollect that brethren went out in search of him, and that Stokin at length found him assassinated and buried under a sprig of acacia. Stokin's good luck on this melancholy occasion endeared him to the king, and procured him his most confidence. Solomon, after having the funeral obsequies of that great man celebrated with as much splendor and magnificence as possible, determined to take public satisfaction of the perpetrators of that horrid crime and sacrifice them to the manes of his deceased friend. He issued a proclamation promising a considerable reward to any person who should detect the place where the villains lay concealed, who committed this horrid murder, declaring at the same time that he would even forgive the assassin himself, providing he would make his appearance in his presence and acknowledge his guilt. But he must give up his accomplices so as to bring them to condign punishment and thus expiate the greatest of crimes. This proclamation was out for a considerable time without his receiving any intelligence concerning the matter, when one day Solomon was sitting in his hall giving audience to more than 90 masters or other officers of the order. Zerbal, the captain of the guards, came in and informed him that a strange person desired to be admitted to the king in private, as he had a matter of the utmost consequence and importance to communicate to him. The brethren were alarmed at the readiness with which the king consented to this private audience, for fear of any danger to his sacred person. Said audience proved of short duration, and the king's speedy return removed their fears. He informed them that this unknown person was acquainted with the retreat of a murderer of Hiram Abiff, and that he had offered to conduct thither such people as would choose to accompany him, to inform themselves of the truth of what he had asserted. The brethren all to a man stood up and offered their services to the king on this occasion. The king was highly pleased with their zeal, but declared that among such a number of virtuous brethren, the casting of lots should determine who should have the honor of being employed in this important matter, to bring this odious victim, on whom he intended to wreak his vengeance. Consequently, the names of all the attendants of the building who were present were put into a box, and he declared that those 9 whose names should be first drawn from the box should be the brethren appointed to follow the unknown man, and bring the traitor alive and make him an example to the latest posterity. The lots were drawn, and joy gladdened the faces of those whose names came out first. They received directions from the king to follow the unknown man who would conduct them to the cave which was the traitor's residence since his crime. They obeyed the order and departed, but one of the 9 named Joabot, whom you this day represented, animated with uncommon ardor, and thinking his brethren walked too slow, got ahead of them and was the first to come to the cave or assassin's asylum, which was at the foot of a bush that seemed to burn, and a star which had conducted them, appeared to be fixed over the cave. Joe Abbot, inflamed with rage, entered it, and by help of a lamp which hung in the cave, saw the villain fast asleep lying on his back, with a dagger at his feet. Joe Abbot seized the dagger and struck him with all his might, first on his head and then on his heart, on which the villain sprang up with fury, but immediately dropped down dead at his feet, pronouncing only the word Necum. Joe Abbot cut off his head, then quenched his thirst at the spring in the cave and was joined by his brethren, whom he was just going to meet. They, on seeing the head of the traitor cut off, represented to Joe Abbot that he had committed a fault by his overzeal, and that by thus putting an end to the villain's life he had rescued him from the tortures which Solomon had prepared for him. They assured him that Solomon would not pass unnoticed this piece of disobedience of orders, but would certainly punish him for it. They also stated that they would intercede, however, with the king to procure his pardon. After having quenched their thirst, Joe Abbot took the head and walked back to Jerusalem. When they arrived, Solomon, on seeing them, was going to give orders for the intended torture, when he espied Abiram's head in Joe Abbot's hands, at the sight of which he could not restrain his wrath. He at once ordered Stokin to put Joe Abbot to death, which order he would have executed if all the brethren had not thrown themselves on their knees and begged him off, as the brethren of this chapter have done for you, my brother. You see what a deal of instruction may be drawn from the circumstances attending this history. First, by the death that this traitor suffered, that crimes never go unpunished. Sooner or later they meet with their just deserts. Secondly, you may learn from the danger which the impetuous Joe Abbot was in, how unsafe it is to exceed our orders, and that it becomes a necessary duty literally to comply with the orders of our superiors. Thirdly, by the pardon procured for this zealous brother, you may also learn how easily the heart of a good king is influenced to be merciful. You also see how useful it is to have friends who interest themselves warmly for us on critical occasions. Most Sovereign, Knox 8 and 1. All rise. Most Sovereign, let us applaud our newly made brother by the mysterious numbers. All clap with their hands. 8 and 1. Lecture. Most Sovereign, Brother Stokin, are you a master elected? Stokin, the ballot has alone determined the matter, and I have been made acquainted with the cave. Most Sovereign, what have you seen in the cave? Stokin, a light, a poniard and a fountain, with the traitor Kirop or Abiram. Most Sovereign, of what use were these to you? Stokin, the light to dispel the darkness of the place, the dagger to revenge the death of our respectable master Hiram Abiff, and the spring to quench my thirst. Most Sovereign, where were you made a master-elect? Stokin, in the hall of audience in Solomon's palace. Most Sovereign, how many masters elected were made at that time? Stokin, 9, of whom I was one. Most Sovereign, from what order and number of people were they chosen? Stokin, from upwards of 90, mostly intendant of the building and some masters. Most Sovereign, what motive prompted you to become the master elected? Stokin, the desire of revenging the death of Hiram Abiff, by destroying his murderers. Most Sovereign, where did you find the assassin? Stokin, in the bottom of a cave, situated at the foot of a burning bush near Joppa, not far from the sea. Most Sovereign, who showed you the way there? Stokin, an unknown person. Most Sovereign, what roads did you pass through? Stokin, through dark and almost inaccessible roads. Most Sovereign, what did you do when you came to the cave? Stokin, I laid hold of the dagger which I found there and with it struck the villain so violently on the head, then on the heart, that he expired immediately. Most Sovereign, did he say anything before he died? Stokin, give me first letter of the first syllable, and I will give you on the first letter of the second syllable. Most Sovereign, the first is N. Now give me the other. Stokin, K. Most Sovereign, what do these two letters N and K mean? Stokin, Necum, which signifies revenge. Most Sovereign, how was your election consummated? Stokin, by revenge, disobedience, clemency and 8 and 1. Most Sovereign, explain this. Stokin, by revenge I destroyed the traitor, by disobedience I exceeded the orders given me by the king, and by clemency, through the intercession of my brethren, I obtained the king's pardon. And lastly, by 8 and 1, as we were only 9 chosen for this business. Most sovereign, what did you do after having killed the traitor? Stokin, I cut off his head and quenched my thirst at the spring, and being fatigued laid myself down to sleep until my 8 brethren entered the cave crying revenge. Most sovereign, how did Solomon behave and receive you when you presented him the traitor's head? Stokin, with indignation, as he had proposed to himself much gratification in punishing that villain, and he even doomed me to death, but on account of my zeal, forgave me. Most sovereign, what did the dark room represent into which you were conducted before your reception? Stokin, it is the representation of the cave where I found the traitor. Most sovereign, how came you to be left there blindfolded? Stokin, to call to my mind the traitor's sleep, and how often we may think ourselves secure after committing a crime, when we are in the most danger. Most sovereign, how did the elected walk? Stokin, darkness obliged them to put their hands before their eyes and heads, to prevent being hurt or knocking themselves against anything. As the roads were bad and uneven, they were obliged often to cross their legs over one another. Most sovereign, what does the dog represent that you see in the chapter on the road near the cave? Stokin, the unknown person or the good citizen who conducted the elected. Most sovereign, what does the naked bloody arm with the poniard mean? Stokin, the grief still subsisting for Hiram Abitha, one of the murderers, was punished, and it was done by Mason, and as yet some unpunished. Most sovereign, what emblems do you use to express the number of 9 elected? Stokin, the first, by the 9 red roses at the bottom of the black order. Second, by the 9 lights in the chapter. Third, by the 9 strokes of the scepter and mallet, and fourth, by the 9 kisses, 4 on each cheek and worn on the forehead. These are the emblems of the 9 elected. The red is the emblem of the precious blood that was spilt in the temple and ordered to remain there until revenge was fully completed. Most sovereign, how do you wear that large black ribbon? Stokin, from the left shoulder to the right hip, with the poniard hanging at the bottom of said order. Most sovereign, of what color is your apron? Stokin, white skin, lined and bordered with black and spotted with red. On the flap a bloody arm holding a dagger, on the apron a bloody arm holding a bloody head by the hair. Most sovereign, with what is the chapter of the elect hung? Stokin, with red and white mixed with flames, white flames on the red, and red flames on the white. The one indicates the blood that was spilt, and the white the order of purity of the elected. Most sovereign, why have you no more than 1 warden? Stokin, because the chapters were always held in Solomon's palace, where no one was permitted but his favorite, who was privy to what passed. Most sovereign, what more is to be done? Stokin, nothing, as everything is achieved, and Hiram Abitha avenged. Most sovereign, give me the password. Stokin, big old curl. Most sovereign, what is the great word? Stokin, Necum. Most sovereign, is there no other password? Stokin, yes, there are 2 more by which we know one another, Joabbat and Stokin. Most sovereign, at what time did the elected set out for the cave? Stokin, just at dark. Most sovereign, when did they return? Stokin, at daybreak. Most sovereign, how old are you? Stokin, 8 and 1, perfect. Closing ceremonies. Most sovereign, Knox 8 and 1. Stokin, Knox 8 and 1. All rise. Most sovereign, makes the sign by putting his hand on his forehead, and says, My brethren, let us renew our obligations. All make the sign with their poniards together, first at the head and then at the heart. Most sovereign, Knox 8 and 1. Stokin, Knox 8 and 1. Most sovereign, brethren, ignorance yields to our repeated vows. Let us advance in our labors. I declare this college closed.